Today we will talk about the banking system, and the banking system is the most pro-cyclical type of economic activity in Russia. Benefiting from economic growth and increasing credit portfolio, in the crisis they face the most challenges. In one moment, corporate clients starts to demand higher return on their deposits. Your trustworthy clients starts to delay the payments, and all the risks that you consider independent are starting to simultaneously realize. And on top of that, the population, frightened by the possible devaluation of the ruble, starts to call off the deposits. So, what banks should do and what they shouldn't do, and do exist some general recipe or not for the banks in such a crisis situation. Today, this question I want to address Mr. Stuart Lawson. Mr. Stuart Lawson is a senior advisor at Ernst & Young and the head of UK Business Centre and a member of Russian-British chain of commerce since 2013. Mr. Lawson has a great expertise working in the Russian banks. He worked at Citibank and HSBC and Bank Soyuz and Delta Bank, and for 4 years in a row he was elected as the best banker in Russia. So we are all ears.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. When I hear that, best banker in Russia, best at what? I have to say, Bank Soyuz essentially went bankrupt in 2008, so that doesn't really sound like the best banker in Russia. But I think actually those awards, and they were from the Central Bank and the Banks Association and the Ministry of Finance, they really recognized the fact that at the time I was the first foreigner to be the A signature, the CEO of a fully Russian bank, which was Deripaska's bank. And when I got it, it was a captive bank. And the 4 years that I spent in Bank Soyuz were the most formative of my career in Russia, by far, because it was my opportunity to be inside the tent. I understood what it was like to be a Russian banker for a Russian, which is pretty different from being the CEO of Citibank, setting up a business for Citi in Russia with all the protection and all the paraphernalia of a large international brand. That's a very different experience from being given the A signature, which by the way carries full criminal responsibility, which I became quite aware of in 2008, this is really big decision making. And because of the nature of the beast, which is that, if you're in Citibank, you're responsible to a board of directors, a bunch of shareholders, you're, constrained by credit process, you operate within certain constraints, and suddenly, out of that environment, I was working for a single shareholder, who I could, the principal conversation I had with the guy was at the outset, what do you want from this captive bank you have, which, by the way, a captive bank, as you presumably know, you don't have external clients really. You basically have liabilities and assets within a big industrial integrated organization. And so my question to him was, what do you want me to do? And his answer was, I want you to build a standalone retail, commercial and investment bank. So you can imagine my next question was, what was my next question? Somebody asks you to build that bank, what are you going to ask them? What? What are you going to ask them? You're just going to do it? You're going to say, that's fine, I'll go off and do it? Do you think you need something? Anybody know what it takes to build a retail bank? Think about it. What do you think you need to build a retail bank? Sorry?
Client base.
Client base. How do you find the clients? Investment. Let's just assume, let's just go the easy route. Okay, if you were going to find the clients, we're talking about retail, you need to do some marketing, you need to create a brand. Actually, you need to create you can't just sell your bank on the basis that, oh, you know, please come and be our customer. You have to create a product. So first of all, you have to create the product, then you have to create the brand. And then back in 2004, before Tinkoff, you had to build some offices because Russians wanted to see offices. And then you've got to put some people in the offices, so now you've got to hire the people. And you've got to put them in front of an IT system, now you've got to build the IT system. Now what do you think you need to do all that? Yeah, right, money. You know, with nothing you get nothing. You're sitting in a captive bank, the captive bank has no external value. And now somebody comes and says to you, okay, now you build the external value, well, you're going to need capital to go out and buy the offices, build the people, create the people. By the way, hire. How do you hire? How do you hire into a captive bank good bankers? You go up to the banker and you say, hey, there you are, you work in Alpha Bank, you know, you've got a great salary, you're doing well. What I'd really like you to do is take that career of yours and move to this captive bank where we work for Deripaska, but we don't know any external clients. Please take a risk on me. Well, I'll tell you what, that's a kind of hard sell. So those people are going to cost you more money than if you're working at Citibank. If I was hiring somebody into Citibank, I'd pay a discount. If I'm hiring somebody into Deripaska's shop, which is a captive bank, I've got to pay a premium. So now I'm paying premiums for the people, I'm trying to find offices, I'm trying to build a brand, all of this stuff is costing money. And I turn to my friend, well now you see, in Citibank, that would be a business plan. You'd create a business plan, and then there'd be like 7 people that you have to get sign-offs, minimum. And each of them would have 3 people working for them. So you'd spend nearly a year and a half running around the building trying to find people to sign off on your business plan. And finally, somebody would give you the capital allocation, and then you'd be very controlled in the way you rolled that out. With Deripaska, you have a meeting if you can find him, and then you sit him down and you say, okay, I need $120 million to start building this bank of yours. Because that's the minimum. Because you know what? You can build an investment bank by hiring, you know, I can hire this group over here and we'll have an investment bank. Just have some systems, take some risk, get out there in the market. We don't need any infrastructure. Because we're going to create revenues that are highly volatile, which are going to give us no multiples in the market, which is the way that the market views investment banking activities. But we can create an investment bank in an afternoon. But if I'm going to create a retail bank, I've got to find those customers. That doesn't happen overnight. It has to be through product. By the way, never launch twice. You only get a chance to launch a product once. So you can't sell what you don't have. So before you can even get to the public, you have to create the product internally, and then you have to make it in a way that you can then sell it through the channels that you've decided. So guess what happened? I said, Mr. Deripaska, I'd like, say, $150 million. He just looked at me and said, no, you're not getting any money. And I said, well, okay, that's the end of that conversation, man. It's been very nice to have met you. You can't get me to build something if you don't give me the money. And the deal that we had was I was allowed to take whatever risk I wanted, because actually one of the things that has real value is how much risk can you take. So I took about $3 billion worth of risk. And we made about $120 million after tax in the first year. And the deal with Deripaska was you don't touch that money. Because obviously he's like, oh, really, $120 million? You know, I can use that. And my deal was, okay, no, you can't. The deal here is we take the risk, we build the bank. And in the first year it was 120, I think the second year was like 90. Third year, unfortunately, we didn't de-risk. The third year was 80, and the fourth year we were bust. But that's another story. So, my experience in Russia, before I got to Russia, I was 25 years at Citibank. So how old is the oldest person in the room? Probably 30? 30? I don't know. So you were 5 when I had 25 years of Citibank, and I had it in 11 countries. Now the reason why people will say, oh, 11 countries, you know, that doesn't mean you couldn't keep a job in one. And actually 11 countries in 25 years, you're moving all the time. And the reason I was moving all the time was that I woke up on August the 2nd, 1982, and the business as usual, stable corporate bank in Kenya, Nairobi, was in the middle of a coup. And there's nothing like a coup to give you a good crisis. Because you see, mostly we have economic cycles, but actually when you have the guys with the guns, they give you an economic cycle. Right there, right then. So I basically woke up one Sunday morning, and there out of nowhere there was a crisis, a cross-border political crisis that immediately became an economic crisis, that immediately flowed through into our portfolio, that immediately gave me the experience of running a corporate banking crisis. So when I talk about crisis in Russia, and I talk about the way banks react to crisis in Russia, I actually had a masterclass in crisis for the previous 14 years before I got to Russia. Because I managed the crisis in Kenya, and then they said, oh, you seem to know what you're doing, so we'll park you in Athens, and when the next thing blows up, we'll send you there, which was in Egypt. So in 1981, I got to do Egypt. Sorry, in 1984, I got to do Egypt. When I finished with that, they parked me in Paris, and then Oslo blew up, Norway blew up, so they put me in Norway. And finally I said, okay, now I want to create my own crises, and I went off and I did leverage buyouts and restructurings in the London market. Of course, I thought I was doing leverage buyouts, but actually if you put enough debt on top of a company, you actually create instability, and that company then ends up in restructuring. So I built my portfolio, and then I got to restructure it. And then once I finished restructuring the UK portfolio, I got sent to Italy, where my client committed suicide within 10 days of me arriving, which is not a good leading indicator. And we restructured the Italian portfolio, and then I got given Citibank in Russia. So when I talk about the Russian banking system, when I talk about crisis with you, I'm talking about, oh, I've got my little pointer. I am going to talk about not just what happens in Russia. I'm talking about, these are some thoughts that I've had, having had the opportunity to enjoy crises from around the world. So first of all, what is a crisis? What is a crisis? I've given you a hint. What's a crisis? Is it a crisis when you can't answer this question? Maybe. Now that's one sort of crisis. What's your definition of a crisis, do you think? An economic crisis? What has to happen?
High volatility, unstable.
High
situation.
volatility and
Unstable situation.
An unstable. Well, high volatility creates an unstable situation.
Sure.
So one of the things that happens is you get big movements, both up and down. Right? It isn't necessarily in one direction. So once now, I mean, another way of saying that is historical inputs do not create the historical outputs. So the sun always rises, but the sun stops rising one day. It can be that the sun always rises and suddenly two suns rise. So the historic, the thing that you were comfortable with, the thing that you relied on for your experience, something changes. And the something that changes causes massive impact on your business plan. And it's this thing about rapid escalation. It's not that things slowly develop. In a crisis, generally, I've discovered that most people have a plan. What do you think the plan of most people in a crisis is? What would you do in a crisis? Imagine, for instance, for a second, that you had a crisis, and it was something that you've never encountered before, right? Now, of course, in Russia, of course, you've all encountered crises before, so it's a bit difficult for you to imagine. But imagine a situation where something happens out of any of your prior experience. What's the first thing you do?
Get away with a central bank.
yeah, well that's a Russian answer. Actually, it's probably true in any market. The first thing you do is find out how much cash you've got. I'll tell you what, if you're a company, the first thing you do, really, draw down all your lines immediately, whether you need them or not. Any clean overdraft, any line you've got, any bank, draw it down. The moment you feel there's a crisis coming, once you've got the money, they don't have the money, you have to get the money back from you. So the first thing you do is you reverse your terms of trade as hard as you can. Right? You pull in as much cash and you take back as much, you try and reduce your receivables. All you're thinking about is cash, 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 cash. Because cash is oxygen. And if you're 30 meters down and you've got the oxygen and the other guy doesn't have the oxygen, you own him. You take his market share, you take his people, you take his position, you take whatever you want, because the guy doesn't have any oxygen, he's turning blue. And cash is king, just, that's the way it is in a crisis. But actually, there's something else I was thinking about. What do you do? What's the first thing you do? Apart from, do the important things. Apart from buying Mercedes, or, go out and buy a Rolex watch, which is the other thing you do. You do nothing. Absolutely nothing. You are a rabbit in the headlights. You sit there stunned because it's outside of your experience. And then you come up with a plan. You know what the plan is? The plan is you hope things get better. Right? And when that doesn't work, you just hope a little harder. And I've watched that over and over again. And when I come to talking about what you have to do in a crisis, you're going to understand why my management style is a little autocratic. Because if you're dealing with a room full of people who are stuck because they don't know what to do, you have to get them moving. Action in a crisis is the thing you have to do. Analysis you need to do first, because you better not just act. But the moment you've done the first set of analysis, you have to move into action, because things are changing extremely quickly. Unexpected events appear. And by the way, generally not where you expect them to appear. It's not the risk that you think about, it's the other risk. I have when I used to teach risk, I used to call these risks bunny rabbit risks. It means that if you put one bunny rabbit in the wardrobe, you have one risk. If you put two in, you don't know how many risks you've got. There's a chemical reaction between the bunny rabbits, between the risks, and the risk on the way in is different from the risk on the way out. Dramatic shifts in capital. Everything that's going on here is like, not time-lapse, well, it's like time-lapse. It's like when you play back time-lapse. Everything moves very, very quickly. Flowers open, flowers close. Rivers appear, rivers disappear. It's all happening at twice the speed it would normally happen. And because the historical inputs are no longer creating the historical outputs, you're kind of lost. Because now, how are you going to drive? One of the images I've got is you go try drive, unless you're driving a Tesla, go try driving looking in the rearview mirror. Doesn't work very well. But all the information that you've got, all the information that you're using in your businesses, is information that is based on historical input, historical output. So if you're based on historic information, and by the way, that's all you've got, then you've got a problem, because you can't view out in a changed environment. And one of the tricks in crisis management is to redefine your data points. Because if you use historical data points and you've got all this stuff going on, the historic data points may no longer be relevant. Let me give you an example, which, by the way, Chatham House rules, as in, do not write this stuff down and publish it in some HSE book on crisis management by Stuart Lawson, because then I have to leave the country. This is me to you, this is my information, I'd rather this wasn't used word for word anyway. Use it for your own use. So, in 2008, I had just been made... If you ask me what's one of the proudest things I've achieved, first of all, it's obvious, my son. He's 19 years old. After that, in my career, the thing that I'm the most proud, one of the things I'm the most proud of, is that I could work for Deripaska for 4 years and then be hired by HSBC. That's a good trick. It means I could work deep in the heart of the Russian banking system and still have a CV and integrity and a personal reputation that allowed me to be hired into a bank that's known for the highest levels of integrity. Now, there I am, I'm sitting in HSBC, and first of all I get dragged into the Hermitage scandal, because we were Browder's trustee for Hermitage. And all of the Magnetsky stuff and all those glorious things that went on around that started happening. Now, for me, I was by that stage used to the Russian environment. For my colleagues back in London, they hadn't got a clue. They didn't understand the dynamics, and they were wrong on many of the calls that they made. So one of the first things that has to happen in a crisis, and by the way, that was a crisis all by itself, was that you have to be able to communicate hard. You communicate hard, up, sideways, and down. It's not about, oh, can I convince my people to do the right thing? You've also got to keep the people that you are working for on board. And that means that you have to create credibility. Now imagine, March 2008, I made the CEO. Hermitage starts happening in April. And by about June, July, I'm beginning to feel a little queasy about what's about to happen in the market. Not because I knew what was going to happen, but things didn't feel right. So in HSBC at the beginning of the year, I met a guy. When you run a bank for an international organization, dozens of people come out of the woodwork. Dozens of matrix people that run products, dozens of product people who think they need your time. Everybody crawls out, if you're the CEO of an organization here in Russia, all these people crawl out of the woodwork and they all want a piece of you. And this guy turns up in my office and he sells banknotes. When you get dollars out of the ATM downstairs, who needs dollars anymore? You're quite right. But when you get dollars out of the ATM, they didn't print them in Russia yet. Or if they did, they were not real dollars. But if you get the dollars out, they had to be shipped in a big old plane. And when you've decided that you don't want dollars anymore, you're going to give them back to the bank and they're going to have to be shipped out. If you're a custodian, if anybody in the audience wants to get to be a custodian in a bank, you will need to keep a float of money enough to stop the first indications of a run on the bank. Because actually, the one thing that you don't want as a banker, that's going to kill you straight away, is if your clients turn up and you don't have enough cash on the premises to honour their requirements. The first day, one of your clients goes on the Twitter or Facebook and says, you should try HSBC, they have no money. And then suddenly somebody else says that, and suddenly somebody else says, no bank can survive a run on its cash. So one of the first things you, as a vault custodian, are going to be told, keep enough of a float. The problem with keeping afloat is it's dead money, because it doesn't earn interest, it's sitting there. It's costing you reserves at the central bank, it's going to cost you money. So you want to keep enough money to make sure there can't be a run on the bank, but you want to keep it within you don't want to fill up the whole vault, because that costs money. So you're going to keep it at a reasonable level. Which means that the people that sell currency are busy. They're bringing their planes in, they're bringing their planes out. They're either importing dollars and euros or they're exporting dollars or euros so that they're keeping this float, right? So this guy comes to see me in March. It's nice to meet him. We make a couple of $1 million a year. You know, he's not important to my business. He's a guy that's doing something somewhere else. By September, the crisis has hit. And suddenly the ruble starts to depreciate heavily. And I'm sitting there in my office and I'm thinking, what can I find out that other people can't find out? Because it's, and I'm sure you've been told this, it's not what you do, it's what you do relative to other people in life, in business, that matters. What you do may make a lot of sense, but if what you're doing relative to competition puts you in an inferior position, you're losing the race. It's like you know the old joke with the two guys and the bear? Well, okay, for those people that don't know the joke with the two guys and the bear, they're walking through the forest, they're having a nice day, suddenly they see a huge bear. One of the guys immediately stops, takes out his running shoes. The first guy looks at him and goes, you know what, you're an idiot, you're never going to run faster than that bear. And the second guy says, I don't need to run faster than the bear. I just need to run faster than you, right? So in this world, in this competitive world, it's not about how you're doing absolutely, it's how you're doing relatively in a competitive market. And for me, the trick was, because I knew this from my crises days, other places, if I could just think, or if I could get my hands on proprietary information that puts me one step ahead of the market, I'm in good shape. So my historic information isn't useful anymore, or it's become derailed. What's useful to me is, bing, how many dollars are being brought by all the Russian banking system into Russia. Because if I know how much the custodians are ordering to order dollars into their vaults, and by the way, don't forget that HSBC is one of a small number of banks servicing the whole of the banking market here. If I can get my hands on how many dollars are actually crossing in, it's like a sweet shop. We're bringing in hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, and they're being distributed to the Russian banks, I now have a surrogate for how quickly the devaluation is going to happen. Because all those clever custodians, they're going to manage their float so that there's not too much cash, but they're going to bring in enough cash to make sure that they're able to meet the needs of their customers. So I start getting a daily report from this guy of how many dollars are coming through. Now you might think, if we're getting hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe I should be interested, in whether they get lost. But the fact is that they're constructed in a way that it's insured externally, and we never take physical ownership of the cash in Russia, so there's no risk. We made sure of that. But I now had a chart, and I became this kind of like guru of being able to know how quickly the devaluation was happening, and people thought, well, now what, you must be aware of M2, or maybe you know the governor, or no, I didn't. I knew how many dollars were coming into the market. And so I'm not suggesting that you should run around trying to find confidential information, that is in other banks. I'm just saying, look for relevant information that will trigger action by you, that will take your action ahead of the marketplace. That's what we're trying to do. Let me just deal with this business between tactical and strategic. What's the difference between tactical and strategic?
Tactical is in a short period,
Yeah?
and strategic is long period.
Okay, well that works. Yeah, it's true. If you're a sailor, which my sister's a sailor, what are the two pieces of information you need? It's also true for any business plan. But, before you do anything else, what are the two pieces of information you need? If you're a sailor.
Final point.
Well, that's one of the two pieces of information.
Yes.
Where does the wind blow?
No, that will affect the next set of decisions. If you know where you're going, but you don't know where you are, how can you plan? You need two pieces of information. You need to know where you are, and you need to know where you're going. A lot of people forget to measure where they are. But if you don't know where you are, how can you possibly plot a route? So strategy is about having that long-term view. And tactics, literally, if you're a sailor, is as you tack. If the wind's blowing in this direction, you have to go like this to get to that final point. But you constantly have to have that final point in your vision. Now, here's the thing. I have some favourite sayings. One of my favourite sayings, by the way, is the world is small and round. You never get the chance to make a second first impression, and you never get the chance to make a second last impression. Everybody understands the first one. Oh, we need to look good the first time we meet people. What they don't understand is as you leave that room, as you leave that door, actually the last impression of you is as important as the first one. So do not take the opportunity to tell your boss what you really think of him, because you'll be surprised how many times you see him as you walk into a door in about 3 years' time. And a second of my sayings is never let the urgent crowd out the important. Okay, why? If you let the urgent crowd out the important, what happens when the important becomes urgent? You can't do it. You don't have the time. So this is the difference between tactics and strategy. You constantly got to say, what is it that I'm trying to achieve overall, and manage to that overall strategic objective. It doesn't apply in a crisis. It doesn't apply in a crisis because if I'm dead tomorrow, it doesn't matter what my long-term plan is. And because cash becomes king, and because decisions have radical impacts on your business plan, and because you're not dealing in minor movements in market share, but massive movements in market share, every urgent issue has to be balanced against whether or not that's going to cause me to run out of cash. And this business of balancing between tactics and strategy, I'll make it real for you. When the crisis hits, you have some big decisions to make. How are you going to hoard your cash? Taking a loan out of the central bank, for sure. But now, are we going to stop our R&D? Are we going to stop our training? Are we going to stop hiring? Are we going to stop marketing? These are all the most painless things you can do. But they have a long-term impact. If you stop hiring, if you stop investing, if you stop creating the next set of products, then if there's an immediate bounce back, you've got a big problem. Because now your competitors, remember them, They will, if they kept investing and they kept paying people and they didn't fire people and they hired in good people, when the recovery happens, they're positioned to be able to grow, and you're sitting there trying to catch up with them. On the other hand, so 2008 looked like that, right? Straight down, straight back up again, a classic V. 2014 looks like a square root, down, up a bit, flat. So if you have not taken those actions to hoard your cash and create long-term cash resources, and the recession is a long one, you're going to run out of air before your competitors if they've taken long-term action steps up front. Okay, those aren't interesting. I'm going to try and, I can, look, this isn't terribly interesting. It is interesting, but unfortunately we're not going to have time, so there you go. Right, I want you to picture the scene. Today was a beautiful day. You're out on a canoe, well, not a canoe, a boat. You're in beautiful countryside. You're with a friend. You have a bottle of white wine, chilled. You have the sun shining, the birds tweeting. You're sitting there having a great time. Imperceptibly, the boat starts to move a little faster. You have another glass of wine, you have another, look around, you enjoy the sun and the birds. Piece by piece, your boat gets faster and faster. But it's not necessarily perceptible to you because it's happening gradually. You, at some point, will end up there. Right? And if you are able to listen for the sound of the waterfall early enough, you can take action. Because your ability to take action before a crisis is radically different from your ability to take action after. Before and after. Before, you have proactive choices. You can make decisions. I, for instance, suggest as a bank, if you're out there in your bank and you begin to hear the waterfall, increase your pricing. Become difficult about covenants. Start, being a difficult banker. You ask too many questions. You become uncomfortable. Guess what? Your customers take their business elsewhere. What does that mean? I'm only talking, by the way, with the ones that you're worried about. If the ones you're worried about take their business elsewhere, what have you just done? You've done two things. You've cleaned your portfolio and you've given a wonderful present to your competitor. Because now what's going to happen is that guy is now going to enjoy all the fun of the fair with his brand new client. And the moment that the crisis hits, if you're in the construction business, it's the real estate business, so perfect, you get refinanced. Oh dear, I've lost you, that's terrible. You're building Moscow City, dear, oh dear, oh dear. Oh, that looks like a terrible thing, we've lost a wonderful client. And now your competitor's sitting with a $50 million loan that you don't have. You have these easy exits, what I call easy exits. By the way, that also applies to people. Because one of the things you're going to do, if you're heading for a crisis, if you're going to a gunfight, take a gunslinger. Right? If you're going to a gunfight, take the guy that knows how to shoot the gun. In a benign, positive environment, you take the guy with a smile and the white hat. He's the guy that everybody wants to hang out with. He knows how to make people feel good. He's going to book assets. If you're going to a gunfight, you take the guy with the black hat, whose only thought in life is how to kill people. Because remedial managers, and I was one for many years, they don't wake up and say, oh, the sun is shining. They wake up and say, when is it going to rain? And they manage accordingly. They manage their whole business accordingly. So you bring in the right skill set, and you can work through the scenarios. If this happens, then we're going to do that. After, you're in reaction mode. You're no longer master of your destiny, because actually you can't paddle to the side of the. If you wake up to the waterfall and you're sort of like 50 yards in the middle of the water, in the middle of the river, you're going over, baby. You may not want to go over. You may start paddling like your life depends on it, but you're going over because you have no options. Some options will be closed off. Now trust me, one bad loan, one set of lawyers, one remedial work will drain the living daylights out of you. You'll be left like, Dracula paid you a night call. Because the fact is that the process of going, I've been there, the process of going through the loan document, deciding what actions you can take, getting it to court, going through the hearings, having an appeal, your grandson is going to see the money back. And you might as well, and you're going to be writing off at least 50% of the loan, guaranteed. And of course you need to change your team. But now you're dealing with, see the problem if you're going to change your team is, one of the things that happens in a crisis, if you play these games, Max Payne, I don't know if Max Payne's still around, but any of these, shoot 'em up games, there's a button where everybody slows down. And if you are Max Payne, you can still move. So you can go hide, you can shoot everybody in the room, you can do a lot of things. That's what you want to be if you're the crisis manager. You want to be able to react faster than the alternatives, than the other guys. And if these other guys are in the business of trying to do their reorganization and they're trying to get people out, and all the time the crisis is happening around them, you have a very good chance of beating them. Almost never in life is a decision avoided a problem avoided. This is Stephen Hester, a buddy of mine who ran RBS. It basically means if you put it off till tomorrow, it's only going to get worse. Which is why you should not have the plan, hope for the best and then hope harder, because it's only going to get worse. Okay, I'm going to run quickly through this because I want to get... So these are the different leadership styles. I mean, this is a whole other discussion. This is coercive. It's pretty simple. You do this. You do this or you're going to have a problem. Now, at the front end of a crisis, where everybody's in bunny rabbit mode, I like bunny rabbit, bunny rabbit in the middle of the headlights mode, you've got to get them moving. You've got to get them moving from where they are to the next stage. Coercion says, I don't care what you think, you're going to do this, you're going to do it my way. It's very effective in a crisis. It's incredibly damaging in a normalized environment. I have a whole lecture I give on successful failure, how to make you fail successfully, which I believe is one of the most essential things you need to learn how to do. And it's based on my experience, because I failed. It's another story, but I failed because I became very good at this type of management, and then I was put into an environment where actually they wanted me to be a real leader and lead, not to be coercive and authoritarian. It's another story. These guys, you see them, they tell you what to do. This is less of the do it or I'll kill you, it's more do it because I have more authority than you. This guy is, listen, hey, I'm your buddy, I know more about this, come with me. This is slowed down a little bit. This one, democratic, what do we all think we should do? Oh, there's a fire, what should we all do? Should we have a discussion? Let's have a discussion. We've got all the time in the world. The fire is beginning to fill up the building, but what we need to do is we really need to think this through. Right? That's democratic. Oh, whatever, you guys do whatever you want. This is also not terrific in a crisis. Pretty good in a venture capital, pretty good in entrepreneurship, but absolutely inappropriate in a crisis. Pace setting and transactional work pretty well. But again, you may not have the time to get into, okay, this is what we're going to do, and if you do this, you're going to get these rewards. Because basically what you want to say is, do it my way, you're going to die. That's what you're trying to do, the urgency of time. So here's the impact on decision making. Our little famous bunny rabbit in the headlights. And then this stuff is seen through your prior experience. So with the moment this stuff happens, you go, oh, I've been through this before. And then you replay it through your previous experience. And by the way, this is dangerous even for an expert like me. And I say I'm an expert because I was an expert. I'm not anymore, I guess. But, even with a guy like me who'd gone through all these crises, well, the riots in Egypt weren't the same as the coup in Africa. The retail bust in Norway wasn't the same as the riots in Egypt. And the problem in Italy was definitely different from everything else. So you can't, even if you're an expert, you can't take the previous crisis and assume the next one's going to act the same way. I've talked about this. And I've talked about massive unexpected risks. It's this business that you have to, every day, You have to create a steering committee in the crisis, and every day you have to put out the radar, forward-looking radar, to be aware of developing risks. I mean, I have another program that I teach about risks, and one of my favorite risks is PR risk, because in a crisis everybody gets stressed. People say the wrong things, even CEOs. When you're the CEO of a bank, when you're drunk at 3 in the morning, you're still the CEO of the bank. And if Commerçant photographer gets you, you are still the CEO of the bank. Now, one of the things that happens in this crisis environment is that the lines of control have to shorten. Because if you're wanting your organization to move rapidly, you can't delegate and have them delegate and have them delegate because you don't have time. So you create far more directive, far shorter lines of control. And as you create these shorter lines of control, you are swamped by the decision-making process. It's a fabulous business. As long as you're at the top of your game and you've got energy and you really feel like getting into it. This is not for the faint-hearted. Because in a crisis where leadership is important in a normal environment, leadership makes the difference between the organization moving forward or dying in a crisis. So what to do? This is actually a picture of Gashaka Street. So the building next to Ducat 1. When we were building Ducat 1, which is where Citibank was in '95, Citibank, in any large organization, the way you manage in 108 countries is you have absolutely rock-hard requirements on brand, operating procedures, credit process, human resources, legal, IT, everything is locked down. And you have to create some flexibility in the system, and we can talk about that another time. How do you round the square where you take a rigid international organization and you put it into a local environment? Because obviously there needs to be some adjustment. And I remember when we were building Ducat 1 that the building guys from headquarters came out and they said, you've got to put fireproof tiles on the roof for an extra $50,000. And I went, what? What? $50,000? There's never going to be a fire on the roof. Okay? The timber, the embers go up in the air, and when they come down, they set fire to your roof, unless of course you have fireproof tiles. And the point of the moral of the story is, if you don't put your contingency planning in ahead of time, it isn't contingency planning. If you put the wall around the Fukushima nuclear site low enough that a tsunami goes inside and then wrecks your backup generator, it's not a contingency. Contingency only works if the contingency that they've been directed against can't overcome it. So that's driving in a rear view mirror. That's the relevant information. This is taking a view, which is that, is it a V, is it a W, is it a Q? Well, when I was asked on Reuters, what's the shape of the crisis, I said it's a Q. And they went, gosh, what's that? And I said, I have no idea, because I don't have a view. Because early on you've got to decide how long it's going to be before you recover. I've talked about it. He who has it wins. When you're down deep, the person with the oxygen is going to win. This is the best way. I had efficient cycling. You see, the point is that as you've shortened these lines of communication, every morning you're going to be faced with a new set of information. And if you're operating on yesterday's information, or you're operating on historic information, and the situation is changing rapidly, and what you do today impacts what happens tomorrow, then the only way that you can stay ahead of the crisis is by absorbing the information from today, building it into your plan, adapting your plan, and using it to create a set of actions that may be different between tomorrow and today. I've already said, analyze your competitors. It's not what you do, it's what you do relative to others. So for instance, I called in a big Russian corporate in 2008, and they had a loan agreement that they negotiated, and they were doing exactly what we were saying, which is they were trying to draw down under their loan agreement for $100 million. And I made a decision, which was, I'm sorry, but material adverse change. By the way, when you negotiate a loan document, most people when they negotiate a loan document, that's the last time they see it. You negotiate it, you sign it, you put it in a vault, that's it. Hopefully things go well. But having been in the business where I've actually negotiated a leverage buyout loan document of 400 pages, I can tell you every word counts when it's time for it to count. And material adverse change is a terrific clause. It's also, we can have a long conversation about how effective it is, but if you decide as a bank that you're not going to disperse the money because you've called material adverse change, then they have to fight you legally to get you to give them the money. So it's the opposite way round to what we were suggesting here as a plan, which is draw down and then let the bank try and get the money back. Well, if you're a bank and you've decided that there's a crisis coming, block the drawdown and let them come and argue in legal terms that you have to give the drawdown. But of course it has an impact. Your relationship with that client just went down the loo, and if that, as it was a short, sharp recession, they're going to come back and they're going to remind you of that conversation, and they're going to take their business somewhere else. So every action that you're taking during this period is going to have an impact, a long-term impact, which is where this business between tactics and strategy comes into play. So yes, as my sister will tell you. Anybody watch The Simpsons? Anybody watch The Simpsons? Oh, I hope you do. So beep beep at the beginning, right? You've got Madge and Maggie. Is that right? Madge and Maggie. And is that right? Marge and Maggie. And Marge is the mother, and she's driving the car, and Maggie next to her, beep beep, she's driving the car as well, except that she's not connected to anyone. And when you're in the CEO role and you're in an environment, and I keep wanting to emphasize this, that things are moving rapidly all the time. So it's like, I did a test drive out in Jaguar. I recommend you can do it, any of you can do it. You get to go between cones, and you have to keep adjusting, but you're doing it very rapidly because you're moving very rapidly. That's what a crisis is. You're moving very rapidly. Things are happening very rapidly. So if you're turning the steering wheel and the organization isn't responding, then you're going to hit whatever it is that you're trying to avoid. And the only way you can check this is creating the feedback loop. Because I'll tell you what, if we just had the people in this room when we had a crisis, life would be easy. I'd tell the back row, please do this, and you're the back row, I can check. But I've got 3,000 people, or I've got 600 people. I don't have a room big enough to put you in, and anyway, I don't have the time to check whether or not all of you are doing what I tell you to. So what you have to do is you have to specimen check that when you say, okay, that we're going to fill the ATMs only with 5,000 ruble notes, because it's better that people have better chances of getting a lot of money out than people go there and there isn't enough money in there. You've got to get somebody out there checking to know whether or not somebody has actually done that, or you just said something and it's going to take a month to implement. Oh, I mean, this was just curious because I was in a very curious position in HSBC. It was curious because in 2008 we had two things to do. On the one hand, we had a corporate business that was there for some time, and we were in the business of defending the portfolio, which was a big enough portfolio. But on the other hand, we were about to launch retail and private banking, which we did in 2009. So I was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I would literally have meetings in Pavletskaya, which was where one of the offices was, and in another location, which is where the operations were. And the person that I was and the way that I was deploying my leadership style changed from coercive, authoritarian, change agent, crisis manager to smiley, leader, follow me, we're going to take over the world, retail leader. So, on the one hand, it's like, you've got to do these things right now because I tell you to. And on the other hand was, we are a premier brand. These are the things we stand for. We're going to take the market by storm. Let's go. And we were hiring 400 people during that period. So, of course, the danger is that you get contamination. That you contaminate the bright-eyed retail bankers with the corporate guys who are going through hell. So you keep them separate. And you very occasionally bring them together. And then it's like oil and water. You working for the same organisation, you working for the same guy. We only see him saying nice things, and over here they say we only see him saying, you know, nasty things. But so that was a particularly interesting, challenging period. Chihuahuas and Dobermans. If you're in the business of causing people to take action, you have to create deadlines that they can't avoid. When I was in Puerto Rico, I mean, Puerto Ricos have been in the news a lot recently, but I can tell you that they have lived their lives, they've done their business in a certain way. And for them, all their deadlines were chihuahuas. What does that mean? It means when you get close to the deadline, you just kick it into next week. And it goes to the next week. Right? No problem. I had to get into their mind that actually these deadlines that we were going to put in place were deadlines that you couldn't move. You know, when you come up to a couple of Doberman, you're going to do what they're telling you to do. Now, getting the transition between Chihuahua and Doberman is tough. And you have to do it by, first of all, educating people. Okay, guys, this is the way it's going to be. I don't want you to tell me that you're working on it. Never let anybody tell you, when you're a boss, please, don't let anybody say, you say, what's going on with the ATM installation? Hey boss, we're working on it. Because we know what that means. It means it's a good question, I haven't got the answer, can we talk about something else? Hey, we're working on it. You know? And then I meant to let the searchlight move up. By the way, when you're a CEO, you only have a certain span of attention because you can only afford, because you're constantly patrolling the perimeter of your business. And if you focus on one person all the time, and you focus on one business line all the time, then people are doing other things over here, and you've got to keep moving. But if you stop and you say, so what's going on? And they say, oh, we're working on it, and you keep moving, well, guess what? They're not going to have finished it by the time you next see them. So what you have to do is you have to say, okay, when are you going to do this? By when? What is the specific issue? By when are you going to do it? And who is it that's going to do it? Not the two people, the one person. If you've got that, you've got forward momentum. And the only way of creating that forward momentum is to say to people, don't say you're going to do it next week. Tell me when you're really going to do it. Don't tell me some date that you think I want to hear. Tell me the date, the closest in that you can really do it, and then hold them to that. If you need a relationship in life at that point and you don't have it, it's too late. Dring, 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 hi. Hey, Stuart, it's been a long time. I haven't spoken to you in months, years actually. Yeah, no, how are you? How's your son? How's your wife? We're divorced. You know, just wondering, just wanted to catch up, you know. But about the $10 million loan, right? I normally gave it like 2 minutes was the maximum that they'd, you know, and then they try and create the relationship in the 2 minute that they hadn't bothered to call me for the previous 6 months, and they're trying to catch up, and the only reason they found my telephone number is they need the money. And in life, relationships are like houseplants, they need to be watered all the time. And it's not that you water them when you need them, it's not when you water them when they're in good times. Rothschild in London, Jacob Rothschild, he was asked, do you call people when they're promoted, when they're successful? He said, never. Everybody else does that. I only call people when they fail, because they'll remember me. Great idea. Probably is a good idea to phone the ones that have just been successful too, but it's a great idea to make sure that when somebody you know is going through a tough time, you're the person that stands out in their memory that held out a hand, because they'll remember that. Cover that. This is probably the last point that I want to make. If you have created a lot of experience and you've tried different things and they've worked and other things haven't worked, you've got to make sure that that is somehow captured for posterity. Because actually the reason I'm doing this is the reason why you should do that, which is that I'm passing on information that I gathered over several interesting years, because if I don't pass it on, you know, it gets lost, or my poor son has to listen to my stories. But so creating a log of what worked and what didn't work will allow you to then create success transfer and lessons learned for the next generation. And the next generation will almost certainly have the opportunity to practice crisis management at some point in their careers. I said I'd do an hour, that's an hour. I've got like 10 minutes that I can do of Q&A, which I'd like to do.
Okay, so thank you for a very interesting introspection into the crisis management. Maybe someone has a question?
Yep.
But that's rather a personal one. Why did you move from banking to Ernst & Young?
Because the bank I was running closed. it was, I mean, basically, look, I'm 63 now, right? So in 2010, I was less than 63, I was 56. I had opened HSBC in 2009. I joined HSBC in 2008. It was Cinderella job. Honestly, I was down in the basement stoking the fires for Deripaska, and along comes this fabulous opportunity. Honestly, for me, that was the coda to my career. This was the Cinderella gets to go to one more ball, right? And for me, HSBC was a brand that I just loved. And my job was to take HSBC from the 18th floor of Pavletskaya Tower and bring it to the ground floor and open it as the retail business. We did a good job, I think. I think in 2009, June 2009, within a year and a bit, we were open. We'd hired 400 people, we'd spent a lot of money, we had the systems working, we had the products in place, we had a big PR. If you look it up on Google, you can see all the pictures, and it was all a big deal. For reasons that were beyond my control, I became aware by 2010 that the bank was going to stop being a retail bank in Russia. Now, I had the job. I could have stayed on in the job. I actually got into some major league arguments with a lot of people because I disagreed with that decision and for other reasons. And by the end of 2010, I was out of a job because there was no point in me being the head of HSBC firing the 400 people I just hired. And actually, this is absolutely true. I have left Russia 4 times thinking that was the end of Russia. Citibank, I left, goodbye. Menatep, Menatep I wanted to leave, but I couldn't. I would have if I could, but I wasn't allowed to. But it was virtually leaving. Deripaska, when I say I moved from Deripaska to HSBC, I didn't. Deripaska basically said, thank you very much, thank you for your work, we'll take it from here. And I left at the end of 2007. And I didn't come back till March 2008. So my career is not, when you look at it on paper, it looks like, how wonderful. But no, it wasn't. There were these absolute breaks where I have a house in France, I pack up, I move to France, I think, all my friends in Russia, I miss them. And then within 3 months, I'm back. So that happened in 2010. I moved to France. I thought that was it. I had one last thing to do, which was to teach a class in Skolkovo. I wrote their business, their risk class. I taught the one class. It was like 20 hours. And one day I was walking through the halls of Skolkovo, and there was Carl Johansson, the senior partner of EY, who I'd known for years. I said, what are you doing? I said, well, I've just taught my last class and going back to France. He said, why don't you come join us? Now, if you say, what is my job today? By the way, I just came from my other office, which is superb, because I now have, this was only printed last week. This is the RBCC, the Russo-British Chamber of Commerce, and this is EY. And I brought them together on the back page of their magazine. EY gives me a platform. It allows me to be in these lobby groups. The trick about keeping relationships going is you've got to stay relevant. Because you're as good as the last conversation, your last room that you were in, the last place that people saw you being important. So the problem for me is that now it's been 7 years since I was in the corner office. So I'm kind of like a yesterday's man. And the thing that's kept me going, the reason I've been able to keep this going, is that EY has given me a platform that allows me to go talk to the CEOs of the banks, that allows me, because of my lobbying with the Association of European Business and the RBCC, it's about creating overlapping, here is an overlapping story where you can create lobby groups. So for instance, I'm the chairman of the City UK, and they're coming on the 1st of November, and we're having a meeting on fintech. Well, EY wants to be part of that, RBCC wants to be part of that, and the UK Embassy wants to be part of that. And there I am sitting in all those different levels with different hats on, able to create value for each of the constituents. So, do I miss being the CEO of the bank? You betcha. I mean, I look at some of the things that are going on and I think, wow, I'd love to get my teeth into it. But I also have, you know, I only have to spend half my time with EY. I spend 30% of my time with you guys, people like you, and the rest of the time I do my lobbying. And in between, I do, I'm writing a book on leadership and I do photography. So, you know, I actually think, by the way, can I just, I know it's a long answer, but I just want to tell you something, that your life, how you develop, this is, by the way, a trailer for my next visit. How you develop in life, there are three major crucibles, things that change you. The first is you do something that you've never done before, like for me in Kenya when the coup came. The second is you screw up and you have a reversal, like what happened to me actually when I had this leadership problem. And the third in life is you have a suspension, which is when your life changes and your life in the future is not the same as your life in the past. And for each of those massive changes in things around you, it's about how you deal with that shift. And so for me right now, I can honestly, no, 2 years out from being CEO, I really wanted to be back in the CEO's office. If you offered me a job now in the CEO's, I don't think I'd trade it for my life at the moment, because it's more interesting the way it is. Long answer, sorry.
Thank you.
You're welcome. One last question, I guess. Yeah.
Stuart, thank you very much for your presentation. While elaborating on how to behave during the crisis, you mentioned that teams matter. And sometimes I also observe that when a company is in crisis or there is some volatile, uncertain environment, management, because probably they don't know what to do, they start to get rid of certain people and start changing the team. But also I'm really frustrated by some of these actions because they let the key staff away, and actually they wasted the value of the company when then they over the crisis. This is some assets that really will help them to fly in the future. And so I would like, my question is about, in your experience, how this was managed, how to distinguish between people who actually you need to change and how to protect the key staff, because sometimes this is the decision of the line managers, and from the perspective of the company it might be good for this particular line manager, but it's not for the company as and the shareholders as well.
Yeah, I mean, in the way that I had my role at Citibank, I was the guy that appeared after someone had just got fired. So generally I was the guy that appeared because the guy before me had just been taken out, and quite often that guy had been around for a long period and had a lot of loyalty from his direct reports, who were now my direct reports. Generally I didn't change anybody in the teams, so generally when I was in those situations I didn't. But as time went by I realized that actually if you're in a rapidly changing situation, one of the problems that you face is if people aren't with you, and if they're actively acting against you because they disagree with you, particularly if you've been imposed, then you have no option, even if they're very important to the organization and this and that and the other. If they're sitting out there constantly undermining you and constantly saying this is not the way we should go, actually I think that I didn't change a lot of the people I should have changed, because I wanted to keep everything together and I didn't want to lose people. But actually I think I made my life a lot harder. So I'm actually arguing against you, which is, yes, you're right, a lot of people, sometimes a lot of people get left, and then the company has to spend a big amount of money to bring them back in again. But I would say, if you require radical change, and there's a saying that my old boss used to have. He used to say, the train is leaving the station. You're either on the train or you're in the station, and now you have to make a decision. And you have to give people enough time, you have to give yourself enough time to analyze it, give people enough time to understand it, and then you have to make that statement, which is, come on, let's all go, and if you don't want to go, I understand, but you're going to have to stay in the station. So it's a fine balance between keeping talent, but you have to have talent that's pointed in the same direction. Because if it's not pointed in the same direction, the weight of carrying it with you is very, very heavy. Very heavy.
Excuse me, may I have one more short question?
Sure.
Actually, it's kind of different. The Chinese air companies never put two Chinese pilots in the same cabin because the Chinese second officer never questioned the actions of the Chinese commander out of respect. And that's why the Chinese companies usually have the second officer of another nationality.
Mhm.
Usually it's a German.
Mhm.
What is the strongest and the weakest points of Russian management? Because you have a lot of experience working in South Africa, in Europe, in Russia. What we should cultivate and what we should learn?
Learn learn that it's not win-lose. Russian management, I win, you lose. And once you've lost, you're no one. This macho power, authoritarian, goes right the way to the top. And Russians, you know, I say this, but I love your country. I've been here for 22 years for a reason. But Russians love to be told what to do. They love to have a strong leader, and they love to have the rules explained, and they want to do, you know, you walk in, you say, what do you want to do? We want to do what you want to do. And I think that changes with youth. I hope that changes with youth. So the good news for a crisis manager in Russia is you walk in and you tell people what to do, they'll do it. So actually, I mean, it's a wonderful environment for a guy that has to make people change quickly, because if you're the boss and you're really the boss and they know you're the boss, then they'll do exactly what you tell them to. The bad news is that if you're trying to do entrepreneurship, or you're trying to create innovation, or you're trying to create flexibility, or you're trying to create a sense of empowerment, delegation, growth, very, very much more difficult. So the two things I'd say is, one, the strongest thing is that you're very resilient as a country, as a people, as staff. You know, you can go through a huge amount and bounce back. That I find, bounce back as a sort of organism, but bounce back as a self perception, far more difficult because of this win-lose thing. So, you know, I'd say that's the bad news, and the good news is that there's a group of youngsters who are coming out not from a communist background, not from the traditional environment, who have a different attitude to life. And you know, if you've got a GDP that's dominated 65-70% by the public sector, you've got to find some way of balancing that, of rebalancing that. I think I'll leave it there.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much indeed. I'm sorry I have to rush off. I've got somebody I have to see. So thank you all very much indeed.
This is complete.
Yeah.